let me tell you something most people never realize until it's too late. Silence isn't weakness. Distance isn't fear. And indifference, that's not losing, that's power. See, when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop reacting, when you stop chasing validation from someone who thrives on control, that's when it hits them. Not because you yelled, not because you fought back, but because you walked away without a sound. And that silence, that's the loudest message you'll ever send. Some people don't survive on love, respect, or connection. They survive on attention. It is their fuel, their validation, their proof that they still matter. Every reaction you give them, every argument, every emotional response, every attempt to explain yourself feeds that hunger. They don't care whether the attention comes from love or anger. To them, it's all the same. As long as you are reacting, as long as you are engaged, they feel powerful. They feel seen. And most importantly, they feel in control. That's why they provoke. That's why they push boundaries. That's why they say things they know will hurt you. Not because they want resolution, but because they want a reaction. Your raised voice reassures them. Your tears validate them. Your long explanations convince them they still have access to your emotions. In their mind, attention equals importance. If you are reacting, they must still matter. If you are fighting back, they must still have influence. And that belief becomes addictive. But the moment you stop responding the way you used to, something shifts. When the messages go unanswered, when the arguments die before they start, when your energy is no longer available on demand, the supply gets cut off. Suddenly, the room feels quiet. Suddenly, there's no reaction to feed on. And that silence hits harder than any confrontation ever could. Because now they're left alone with the one thing they've been avoiding, the absence of control. When attention disappears, panic replaces confidence. They start replaying conversations in their head, wondering what changed. They question themselves not out of growth, but out of fear. Why aren't they responding? Why don't they care anymore? Did I lose my grip? The lack of reaction becomes louder than any argument. Silence forces them to confront the truth. They never wanted to face. Their power was never real. It was borrowed from your willingness to engage. What breaks them isn't your anger, it's your indifference. Anger still shows investment. Anger still says, you matter enough to upset me. Indifference says something far more devastating. You no longer have access. And for someone who measures their worth by the reactions they provoke, that realization is unbearable. Without your attention, they feel invisible. Without your emotion, they feel insignificant. And insignificance is their greatest fear. This is why acting like they don't matter feels so unsettling to them. You're not playing defense anymore. You're not explaining. You're not correcting the narrative. You're not trying to be understood. You're simply unavailable. And that lack of availability disrupts the entire dynamic. They can't manipulate what they can't reach. They can't control what no longer responds. The moment you withdraw your attention, the power dynamic flips quietly, but completely. And here's the truth most people never realize: you were never powerless. Your attention was the leverage the entire time. You just didn't know its value. The moment you reclaim it, the illusion collapses. They lose the fuel that kept them confident. They lose the stage that kept them performing. And when someone loses the very thing that makes them feel important, composed, and in control, they don't just feel ignored. They feel exposed. Silence has a way of revealing things that noise keeps hidden. When everything is loud, arguments, explanations, emotional exchanges, insecurities stay buried beneath chaos. But the moment you go quiet, the distractions disappear. And for someone who depends on external validation, that quiet becomes unbearable. Silence forces them to face themselves without an audience, without feedback, without reassurance that they still matter. That's when insecurity steps forward, no longer masked by control or confidence. People who are secure don't fear silence. They understand it. They respect it. But insecure people experience silence as rejection, as abandonment, as loss of power. When you stop responding, they don't interpret it as peace. They interpret it as danger, because your silence removes the confirmation they rely on. No reaction means no validation. No validation means doubt, and doubt is the one thing insecurity cannot coexist with peacefully. Your silence becomes a mirror they never wanted to look into. Without your emotional responses, they are left alone with their thoughts, their motives, and their behavior. They begin to replay past moments, searching for where they lost you. Not because they want to grow, but because they want to regain control. Silence forces reflection, and reflection exposes the cracks they've been hiding from you and from themselves. That's why silence feels so loud to them. In the absence of your voice, their own inner dialogue grows louder. Questions creep in. Was I wrong? Did I push too far? Why didn't they fight back this time? These questions don't come from accountability. They come from fear. Fear of being insignificant. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of realizing that their influence was never as strong as they believed. When you stop explaining yourself, you take away their favorite weapon. Explanations give them something to twist, something to argue against, something to manipulate. Silence gives them nothing to grab onto. No words to misinterpret, no emotions to exploit, no reactions to weaponize, and that absence makes them restless because control thrives on engagement, not emptiness. What unsettles them most is that your silence communicates strength without aggression. You're not proving a point. You're not seeking justice. You're not trying to win. You've simply decided that your peace matters more than their understanding, and that decision exposes their insecurity in the clearest way possible, because they realize you no longer need them to feel whole, heard, or validated. Detachment is often misunderstood. People think it means you stopped caring, that you became cold, distant, or emotionally numb. But real detachment isn't about losing feeling. It's about gaining clarity. It's what happens when you finally see a situation for what it is, not what you hoped it could be. Detachment is the moment you realize that holding on is costing you more than letting go, and self-respect steps in where emotional attachment once ruled. There was a time when their words affected you deeply. Their approval mattered. Their mood could shift your entire day. That wasn't weakness. It was investment. You cared, you tried, you showed up. But detachment begins when you notice the imbalance. When effort isn't returned. When respect isn't mutual. When you're always the one explaining, adjusting, compromising, and absorbing the damage. Detachment is not a sudden decision. It's a slow awakening to the truth. Strength shows up when you stop reacting automatically. When you pause instead of responding, when you choose not to engage, not because you're afraid, but because you've learned the pattern. You already know how the argument ends. You already know the apology that won't change behavior. You already know the cycle. Detachment is strength because it requires discipline. The discipline to not give in to familiarity, even when familiarity feels comfortable. For someone who relies on emotional access to feel important, your detachment feels threatening. They can sense the shift before you ever say a word. Your tone changes. Your energy changes. You're no longer trying to be understood. You're no longer chasing resolution. And that's when they start to feel it slipping. Not you, but their influence over you. Detachment removes their ability to pull emotional strings, And that loss hits harder than confrontation ever could. Detachment also means you stop taking things personally. Their behavior no longer defines your worth. Their disrespect no longer feels like a reflection of you. You begin to see their actions as information, not insults. And once you stop internalizing what was never yours to carry, something powerful happens. You become emotionally untouchable, not indifferent to life, but immune to manipulation. This is why detachment feels so unsettling to those who thrived on your emotional availability. They can't provoke the same reactions. They can't reach the same parts of you. You're present, but no longer exposed. Calm, but no longer accessible. And in that space, your strength becomes undeniable. Not loud, not aggressive, but unshakable. Control is subtle. It doesn't always look like domination or force. Sometimes it looks like familiarity, predictability, knowing exactly which words will trigger you, which silences will pull you back, which emotions will keep you engaged. When someone has control, they don't need to raise their voice. They already know how you'll respond. That certainty gives them comfort. It reassures them that no matter what happens, they can still steer the situation emotionally. For a long time, they knew your patterns. They knew when you would argue, when you would explain yourself, when you would try to fix things. They knew that if they pulled away, you would chase. If they provoked you, you would react. That predictability became their sense of security. It made them feel powerful, important, and untouchable. Control doesn't always come from strength. It often comes from repetition. But the moment your behavior changes, their sense of control starts to crack. When you don't react the way you used to, when you don't chase the same way, when you don't respond on cue, confusion sets in. They test the old buttons, expecting the same outcome, but the reaction never comes. And that's when they realize something has shifted, not outside of them, but within you. Losing control is destabilizing for someone who built their identity around it. Without control, they feel exposed, vulnerable, uncertain. They no longer know where they stand or how to regain their footing. What once felt like confidence turns into restlessness. What once felt like power turns into desperation, because control gave them a role. And without it, they don't know who they are in the dynamic anymore. This is why their behavior often escalates when they sense they're losing control. They may become louder, more dramatic, more emotional. They may provoke harder, guilt, trip deeper, or suddenly try to pull you back with affection. Not because they've changed, but because they're scrambling. They're trying to restore the balance that once favored them. When subtle tactics fail, intensity becomes the last resort. What truly breaks them is realizing that control was never guaranteed. It was granted. It existed only because you allowed access to your emotions, your time, your energy. Once that access is restricted, there's nothing they can do to force it back. Control cannot survive where boundaries exist, and boundaries don't need to be announced. They're felt through consistency, through calm, through non-engagement. In the end, the loss of control doesn't just frustrate them. It dismantles the illusion they relied on. They're forced to confront the reality that influence isn't permanent and power that depends on another person's participation is fragile. When you stop playing your part in the dynamic, the structure collapses. Not with chaos, but with a quiet, unsettling realization that the control they thought they had was never truly theirs to keep. Most people think revenge has to be loud. They imagine confrontation, exposure, raised voices, or a perfectly timed comeback that finally puts someone in their place. But loud revenge keeps you tied to the very person you're trying to escape. It keeps your energy entangled, your emotions invested, and your focus divided. True revenge doesn't look like chaos. It looks like calm. It looks like someone who no longer feels the need to respond at all. Peace is unsettling to those who expected you to be broken. When someone anticipated anger and instead sees composure, it disrupts their expectations. They thought you would fall apart. They thought you would fight. They thought you would need closure, answers, or validation. But peace sends a different message, one that says you healed without permission and moved on without explanation. And that message lands far deeper than any argument ever could. What makes peace so powerful is that it cannot be challenged. Anger invites debate. Accusations invite defense, but peace offers no entry point. There's nothing to argue with when someone is genuinely unbothered. Nothing to correct when someone no longer seeks understanding. Your calm becomes a closed door, and closed doors frustrate people who are used to walking in whenever they wanted. For someone who thrived on disrupting your emotional state, your peace feels like defeat. They can no longer pull you into chaos. They can no longer trigger guilt, fear, or doubt on demand. Their words don't land the same. Their absence doesn't hold the same weight. And that loss of emotional impact forces them to confront something they've avoided. The fact that they are no longer central to your inner world. Peace also changes the way you carry yourself. You stop over-explaining. You stop anticipating their reactions. You stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen. Your energy returns to you, and with it comes clarity. You start making decisions based on alignment instead of fear. You choose environments that feel safe, conversations that feel honest, and relationships that feel mutual. And that shift becomes visible, whether you announce it or not. What unsettles them most is that your peace doesn't require their acknowledgement. You didn't need an apology to heal. You didn't need accountability to move forward. You didn't need closure to let go. You found peace on your own terms, and that independence strips them of relevance. Because nothing is more humbling than realizing you were once someone's emotional center, and now you're just a passing thought they no longer react to. Indifference is not something you can fake for long. It doesn't come from strategy or pride. It comes from exhaustion meeting clarity. It's the moment you realize you've said everything there was to say, felt everything there was to feel, and given more than enough chances. Indifference is not an emotional reaction, it's the absence of one. And that absence is what makes it final. When you reach indifference, the game doesn't pause, it ends. For a long time, the dynamic survives because emotion is still present. Love, anger, resentment, hope, they all keep the connection alive. Even conflict is a form of engagement. As long as you care enough to react, explain, or defend yourself, the door remains open. The game continues because both sides are still playing. Indifference is the moment you put the pieces down and walk away without announcing it. What makes indifference so powerful is that it cannot be negotiated. You can argue with anger. You can manipulate guilt. You can respond to sadness. But indifference offers nothing to work with. There is no emotional surface to press against, no weakness to exploit, no opening to force a reaction. For someone who depended on emotional leverage, indifference feels like hitting a wall they can't climb. This is often when confusion sets in for them. They try old tactics expecting familiar outcomes, a message meant to provoke. A silence meant to pull you back. A reminder of shared history meant to spark emotion. But nothing works the same anymore. Your responses, if they come at all, are neutral, brief, detached. And slowly, they begin to understand that the connection they relied on no longer exists in the way it once did. Indifference also rewrites the narrative in a way no argument ever could. You're no longer trying to prove you were right. You're no longer invested in being understood. You're no longer interested in who won. that lack of interest speaks volumes. It communicates that the outcome no longer matters because the person no longer matters in the way they once did. And that realization is far more destabilizing than being told off. When indifference settles in, it brings a quiet finality, not dramatic, not cruel, just complete. The emotional bond dissolves without needing closure or explanation. And while it may look like nothing is happening on the surface, everything has already ended beneath it. The game doesn't continue in silence. It dissolves in it. Because once you truly stop caring, there is nothing left to play for. And that's the truth most people never prepare for. Not everyone breaks when you confront them. Not everyone changes when you explain yourself, but almost everyone feels it when you stop caring. Because when you no longer react, when you no longer chase clarity, when you no longer need to be understood, you take away the only thing that ever gave them power, your attention. You don't walk away angry. You don't leave with bitterness. You leave with certainty. And in that moment, without noise, without drama, without revenge, you reclaim your time, your energy, and your peace. Not to prove a point, not to teach a lesson, but because you finally chose yourself.